So these are going to be the most interesting shape note cards you've probably ever seen. So let's dive right into it. Here is source 9. One of the quotes I have from here, it states, in one of the earliest and most famous manifestations, blackness was sold as balm to white self-regard and resulted a fantastic boon in profits when African slaves were marked as Negroes, a distinctly subhuman race. And on the back I wrote, black caricature is born, slaves sold as exaggerations of humans. So this basically is in response to Baldwin's work, and basically it talks about dehumanization through using the black caricature, and that was very prominent in his story, Going to Meet the Man, with Jesse when it was talking about the black man that was burned alive. He was basically the brute caricature, and we see this not only with black men but black women as Jezebels and all those different caricatures. So here's the next quote. See, interesting note card here. It's because I had to print them out. Didn't really want to write it all out. But on the front it says, they supply the energy that keeps in motion cycles of barbarity against which the proprietors claim ironically to be defending their enlightened selves. This is from source 7 on the back. I put, going to meet the man reveals the destructive power of groupthink. So basically, this was another analysis of Baldwin's work, specifically Going to Meet the Man. And basically, like I talked about earlier in my other note cards, groupthink has a huge impact on the perpetuation of dehumanization of the black community, which in turn caused racial tension, which in turn caused the Black Power movement. Here is the next note card. As long as a certain configuration of the world exists, what some of us identify as asymmetrical social and power relations among human beings, there is a need for alternative cultural values and ethical mandates. So again, this was analyzing Baldwin's work and just the imbalance in power between races and cultures in America, specifically white and black. On the back, I put racial inequality must be recognized and social change must be made. So basically, like I said, as a result of Baldwin's work, we can see the power imbalance, which is a natural. It's a natural human. It's like an evolutionary trait. Like um, different races want to be. Well, first of all, different races identify with each other better. Just naturally, it's a survival mechanism. People might say, "Well, I see past race," but scientifically, it's proven that people don't see past race, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your perspective. But in this case, it's what's causing a lot of this power imbalance, and if it's not recognized, then that can lead to social problems. So here's the next note card. The story filtered through Jesse's consciousness communicates the perverted sense of reality that is a condition of what Baldwin called the guilty imagination. Source 7. Jesse sees black people as the caricature. So this is just a continuation of that dehumanization through black people being portrayed as their caricatures, the brute, the Jezebel, the coon, things like that. And basically, that's one of my main rationales, how the Black Power movement stemmed from this dehumanization, specifically through uh, um, these caricatures being used in media even today. Uh, the old Spice commercials with Terry Crews, that's obviously the brute caricature. Idols, musical idols such as Nicki Minaj, she could be considered the Jezebel. Things like that. Here's the next note card right here. It reads, Anna Julia Cooper and W. Webb Du Bois absorbed this insight and encouraged their contemporaries to recognize the transitory, fallible nature of racial constructions embedded in essential nations of human superiority and inferiority. And on the back, I put the human superiority complex is still a very real part of us, according to Baldwin. So this was in response to Baldwin's short stories. And in his short stories, we see a lot of just like I said before, superiority and inferiority, which is a natural human evolutionary trait um, that's still in our brains. I mean, we're going against thousands of years of evolution in a society that's apparently, or for lack of a better term, civilized. And if we can't recognize these animalistic characteristics of discrimination, and we don't acknowledge these things, and we don't acknowledge what we're doing is wrong with the imbalance of power and the superiority and Basically, like Baldwin portrays in his stories, it leads to things like people being burned, lynched, raped, things like that, and it being justified, and that's not okay. Here, I'll save this one for last. Baldwin's experiments. Here's the next one. Baldwin's experiments with perspective, time handling, and revealing his style as expose of harmful illusions. His treatment point of view functions to analyze culture myths about sexuality, to justify violent rape of black women and castration and live burning of black men. Obviously has to do with an analysis of Going to Meet the Man. According to Baldwin, blacks endure dehumanization through violence as a result of the black caricature. So, once again, one of my rationales is the Black Power movement stemming from violence against blacks. In this case, the violence stemming from the justification, or okay, hold on. The violence is justified through the black caricatures, and basically, you see it a lot in this story of Going to Meet the Man, because Jesse, he basically he starts out not racist and everything, but as he goes through this group think process in his village, he starts to have all these really weird sexual problems, and they all stem from these black caricatures, and it's a whole mess. So let's see. This is second to last note card right here. In unmasking a cultural legacy of problematic racial differentiations, African American and post Enlightenment cultural critiques vividly remind us that contemporary Westerners are still wrestling in old age queries regarding of humanity. They also inspire some of us to imagine new possibilities as we engage in current struggles against dehumanization structures in the United States. So I put on the back, dehumanization is still prominent in the U.S. according to Baldwin. So this was in response to a lot of Baldwin's work about dehumanization, and it goes along with the same thing I said earlier, that when blacks came to America, they were deemed slaves. They were called Negroes, and with that word, this caricature was born, and they were marketed as lesser than human. For instance, at slave auctions, they would. It's like selling cattle. Like they would just describe them in animalistic ways, like, oh, he's strong, he's huge, and he's brutish. He's really good for manual labor. Like sell them in that way, and it's like it creates this false image of black people in more way than one, and in turn it causes a feeling of dehumanization even in today's society, and that's what leads to when all this dehumanization just compounds, eventually something's going to explode, and that's what we see with the Black Power movement, with that cultural revolution of regaining a whole race's cultural identity that's been suppressed for so long and manipulated and warped into something that it wasn't, but they were made to believe was, if that makes sense. Um, Here's the last note card. And this one's a bit long. The most important part about this is in no department of his life was Baldwin ever won by the concept of a straight line. We can see evidence of this in prose. So on the back, I put Baldwin never identified with the Black Power movement in order not to label himself. I just thought that was important. Um, this author was talking about how a lot of Baldwin's work does relate to the Black Power movement, but he never really came out and said that, oh, I'm a Black Power movement writer. Just, I guess, so he didn't want to label himself. So I thought that was an important, back like context of Baldwin's work and who he was as a writer, just to give some context. But yeah, and that's my last note cards.